talking to a family member of mine, and something occurred to me. Take a second and talk about the relationships between parents and their grown children, not their little kids who have to stay in the house with them and they live under their rules and it's whatever mom or dad says. It's the ones who are, off to college or even grown with their own children, raising a family, learning life. And I thought about this because I kind of I kind of want to learn from this family member's situation. And it made me realize it actually happens a lot more than I had imagined. I realized that through conversation, a lot of people, in general, they don't like their parents. Not saying they don't love their parents, not saying they're not concerned about what happens to their parents, but I think in general, um, personality wise, a lot of these children in general don't like their parents. They don't like them personally. And I'm seeing this in the fact that some people can't get their children to pick up the phone. Now, this could be a generational thing, correct? But the problem is, some people always pick up the phone for their parents. And not only that, some people always show up and always call on a regular basis. Now, my wife and my oldest daughter have this situation. They're more like friends. They literally hang out, they go places together. You know, they always talk to each other on the phone. My daughter's calling for advice. When she was younger, we had some issues because I had to be the disciplinarian of the family due to the fact that her and my wife had a friendship situation. So she didn't like to say no to a lot of things we should have. And but as she got older and she moved out and started learning a few things, and she started to appreciate her old dad. So I get calls from time to time, but I realized even then it was a situation where I know my daughter loved me, but I don't think she liked me for a while. And I'm seeing situations with people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, this age range, having an issue with communication with multiple different people. It's like some folks, I'm gonna say right now, if you're in the 50 to 60 range, you probably grew up in a time where, even some parts of the 40s, 50s, 60s range, you grew up in a time where everybody communicated via the phone. The old school house phones. You had to pick up a phone, call somebody. You remember back in the old beeper days, picture days, and you find a payphone and you would call somebody. That's how we communicated. But people of a younger generation, they don't have that. Everything's different now. Everything's text messages. Right before that, it was all emails and stuff like that, and different forms of communication. But they didn't have to get locked into the phone like you do now, where it's hard to, get off the phone, or even the fact that you have to personally talk to this person has become kind of a chore for some people. And I was talking to this family member of mine, and I was trying to get them to, be reasonable about the fact that, your kid doesn't want to speak to you all of the time, primarily because you don't have similar interests or your lives aren't converging in the same areas. I noticed that the person we're speaking on talks to certain individuals and they typically work with those individuals. So they have something to talk about. It's not just getting a call saying, "Hey, what you doing? I wonder, how your day is going." Just checking up. Now, like I said, if you're a certain age or demographic, that's how you did things. Some people consider it to be disrespectful if you didn't call and check up on them every once in a while, like you didn't care, so they expected that call. But a lot of folks, in their 20s, 30s, 40s, they're not doing it like that. They never call. They don't see any reason to call. They figure, hey, answering the phone is good enough. But even that is a problem. Even that is a problem. They say, hey, well, listen, I called, they never answer. I say, but do they respond to text? Yeah, they'll respond to text. Not all my texts, but they'll respond. That's a clear indicator that that's how they like to communicate. You're taking it personal. I'm also related to a guy who, had kind of a fit because his I'm gonna say young adult child, because they're in about 20, 22, something like that. They didn't effectively communicate with them enough, and this person is an over communicator, so they want to call every day or every other day and speak on the phone for an hour or something like that. And once he didn't get that from her, he kind of snapped at her, kind of let her know, oh, well, you don't have to communicate with me then if that's the case or whatever. I try to explain to him that's probably a mistake to take with somebody like that because they're from a different generation. They see things differently. And personally, they don't like to talk on the phone that much. But another thing that came out in this conversation was I realized that some of the times when they don't talk to you like that is because they generally don't like you as a person. They like if you weren't related, you would never hang out. You would never be friends with a person who had that similar personality. You see this at work sometimes where you might see a guy in their 20s and a guy in their 30s or 40s, and they'll hang out because they have similar personalities, even though there's this age gap. They like them as people, so they will, be around them and associate with them. They like a lot of the same things. A lot of parents have a disconnect with their children because you're not the same type of person, and they genuinely just don't like you, like in general. And then not to mention, there are some of the hangups from, rearing children, where they might still have some, resentment for certain issues that happened in the past that you may not even thought about, because that's just some of the minutia that occurs when you're raising a person. But they didn't forget some of that stuff, and they couldn't wait until they turned 18 so they can get away from you. A lot of people are not aware of these things, not aware, and you try to fix the situation. You trying to keep the communication open, and you trying to get closer, and you can't figure out why don't they like me. Sometimes you can't fix that. Sometimes they just don't like you, and that's it. You're not their type of person. Personality wise, you're complete opposites, and you have to be okay with sometimes it's just enough to love a person, and they love you, and that's all that matters. But you're not going to be hanging out. Now, on the flip side of that, like I said, with my wife and my daughter, I see them being friends. They have similar personalities. I also had an uncle and a cousin who was the same way. They would go to clubs together. They would go out all of the times. They were always together. And then I noticed that at the same time, when my cousin was young, my uncle always had him with him. So I think that's where the beginning of the friendship part of their relationship started. And, for some people, when a child is an adolescent, that's too hard because you're too busy being a parent. You're too busy worrying about keeping the structure of your relationship, adult, child. And then some of these children, they want you to let go of that structure at an earlier age. And then when you don't do that, you create a barrier between you. Once they become adults, that barrier is still there. Now they don't even want to cross that barrier. Okay, you mom, I'm daughter, or your dad, I'm son. We're just going to keep it like that, how it always has been. Because some folks, to keep respect to their kids, they always set boundaries. And I was just thinking about that so far as my other children and my relationships with them. I'm starting to pick up on certain things now. Like, even though I feel like all of my children love me, I'm not 100% sure I'm gonna be getting calls later on from some of them. I raised all of them, but at the same time, it's not a situation where they would like to just call their dad for no reason. My wife gets calls from pretty much half of our children. I'll say that. So even he might not even have that type of relationship. I used to tell her with our oldest son, I say, I don't know, babe. I think maybe he don't love us. He would laugh at that, but we know he loves us. It's just he's not the type. We don't have similar interests. Some of the things we listen to him and speak to him about, and we just try to pick his brain about a few subjects. I realize, okay, yeah, this is a person who's completely different than both his mom and his dad. So far as interests, things they like to do, some things are natural, you can't get rid of. For us, it's shopping. For me, it's shopping anyway. I'm not interested. I go in, I'm out. That's how my son is, the same way. But besides that, artistically, just style wise, everything, sometimes they're a little bit different, and that's the bottom line. You just got to accept that, and keep communication open however you can. Sometimes you don't get to dictate what your relationship with your children are, because at the end of the day, they have to be the ones to pick the phone up.